Hey, how's everyone doing? How's everybody doing? We're going to be talking about for the next few videos we're going to be talking about this book, How Jesus Became God by Dr. Bart D. Ehrman, world-renowned New Testament scholar on the origins of Christianity or the historical Jesus. So I read this book, and there's a lot of good. Ehrman has a lot of interesting points. So we're going to be going through this book. So we're going to be reviewing, or I'm going to be reviewing some chapters of this book, uh, which I find interesting or which I find, more or less in line with the Islamic position. The Islamic position, of course, is that there is only one God, and Jesus is a prophet of God who taught monotheism, the worship of one God. So, there's a lot of there's some things in this book which I don't agree with personally, but we'll get to that in we'll get to that in future videos. But where I do agree is that he does say now Ehrman does say some things which, as a Muslim, you're not going to agree with at first, but he later on explains himself. For example, Ehrman says the first Christians were saying that Jesus was God. However, they were not saying that Jesus was identical to God the Father. Rather, he was a subordinate deity who was lesser than God. So Ehrman shows that, there was something called henotheism. Henotheism in this book. Henotheism is that there's one supreme God that you worship, and there's all these subordinate beings or subordinate deities. And Jesus was lesser than God. He was lesser than God the Father, but he was a subordinate of God. So Ehrman does a good job, or Ehrman shows that this is what the earliest Christians were saying. Ehrman also says that like other Jewish figures were seen as God. For example, one second, let me find that. Pages on this book. 37, he says that there were divine humans in ancient Judaism. That means before Jesus, before the New Testament, there were humans who were seen as divine or as God. And one example of this is Moses, which I'll get to right now. 80 of this book, How Jesus Became God, Ehrman states that Moses was seen as a god in Exodus chapter 4, verse 16. Ehrman writes here, Moses is not said actually to be God, but he will function as God. He will be the one who tells Aaron God's message to be delivered to the Pharaoh, and in that sense, he will serve as God. Some later Jews took this message a step further and claimed that Moses was in fact divine. The clearest expression of this view comes in the works of the after-mentioned Philo of Alexandria. Uh, so basically, uh, there were humans who were given divine status and were said to be God. This was the case of Moses, as Ehrman writes on How Jesus Became God, pages 80 to 81. So Ehrman gives a lot of good examples about how human beings before Jesus or before the New Testament were seen as God, but that doesn't mean they're equal. They're identical. They're identical to God. Rather, they're a subordinate. They're subordinate of God. They're lower than God, but they serve this. They serve the same function as a God, as Ehrman states. So this is a really good book. How Jesus Became God. So this is just the first video of many videos where I review this book. So stay tuned for more insights from this book, How Jesus Became God.